Perfect. All right. All right. It is 9 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the stealthier conference of the two. How many were sat in the wrong room before? Okay, so we'll see a few stragglers coming in after, but welcome and glad you all could make it. Welcome to PQ Cyber Day. My name is Ted Shorter. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Keyfactor. We are the players in what is now called the machine identity space. We do everything from, if you've ever heard of the Bouncy Castle open source cryptographic libraries, we are the caretaker of those. We use those libraries as well to provide one of the most popular certificate issuance pieces of software in the form of EJBCA. We also have extremely scalable certificate management and root of trust management software that we provide as well. Obviously, PQ is very near and dear to our hearts because we're kind of at the center of helping with that transition. I think those of us that have been doing this for a while see that there is this freight train coming with post-quantum, and I think for the most part, we have conversations with, right now it's mostly banks and government folks. For the most part, the private sector is largely unaware of this post-quantum train that's on the tracks and heading their way. But I think it's on all of us collectively, both as vendors and whatever your roles may be, to help our organizations and really the world at large through this post-quantum transition, because it's going to be messy and ugly, and whatever we can all do to help with that, I think is going to be super important. So with that, very excited for the morning session. I've been drafted to be your moderator, which basically means just introducing some people and helping with questions. But our first talk today is NSA's post-quantum defense perspective by Dr. Morgan Stern. Just quickly on a bio, Dr. Morgan Stern serves as the technical lead for cryptography in the Secure Engineering Solutions Group of NSA's Cybersecurity Directorate. He has more than 15 years of cybersecurity experience at NSA, with a particular interest in public key cryptography and quantum information science. He earned his PhD in mathematics from the University of Maryland, College Park. So, let's welcome Morgan Stern.
You're clearly much taller than me. Very good. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Glad to kick things off on post-quantum day. I guess I'm not used to being the first speaker, so I'll try to hit a summary of everything hopefully you'll hear about, which should be, quantum and post-quantum and, maybe the next decade or three of cybersecurity. All right, so starting off, what exactly is quantum computing? Hopefully folks know since you've signed up for this, but it's a new method of computation based on properties of sort of the smallest systems that get studied in modern physics. So instead of a transistor being on or off, you're talking about a single photon, a single particle of light having a phase or not. You're talking about an electron spinning up or spinning down, and you can do your same sort of binary computations with those that you can do on a normal computer, but you get some extra oomph from these physics properties, and this extra oomph lets you do a couple of very, very specific sorts of computations exponentially faster than a classical computer. So there's physics simulations, which really was Richard Feynman's original impetus for proposing quantum computing. You have chemistry simulations. Anytime you go to some talk on quantum computing, there's somebody explaining how they'll revolutionize fertilizer production with a quantum computer. And then this third minor thing, the hard problems that underlie just about all of the commonly used key distribution and digital signature algorithms that all of e-commerce relies on. Quantum computers are apparently really very good at that. And currently, if you go online, you'd be able to, pay for time on any number of quantum computers available for use today. It's a nascent commercial industry, and really it's very exciting. Probably once a month you open the paper, and in the science section of an actual newspaper, they'll say amazing new experiment in quantum computing. But still, it's important to note that no one has scaled anything to be even close to what we would call cryptographically relevant at this point. This is a nascent industry, and this is something that shows immense future potential. And with that in mind, the president signed just about exactly 1 year ago National Security Memo 10, the Memorandum on Promoting United States Leadership in Quantum Computing while Mitigating Risks to Vulnerable Cryptographic Systems, which is a nice mouthful. And it discusses a lot about the immense potential and of this physics technology. It discusses how to responsibly develop the physics technology, but also has a section devoted to making sure that while the U.S. and the world reaps the benefits of quantum computing, we are not threatened by it as well. And so, I have my 4 favorite excerpts. You're welcome to go and read the 15-page document yourself. But if there were 4 key takeaways, the cryptography section starts off by saying that the U.S. should prioritize transitioning to quantum-resistant crypto with the goal of actually transitioning the government systems by 2035. And this is a pretty bold goal. Moreover, this really can't be done in an ad hoc way. This shouldn't just be that folks go out and buy something that says it's quantum resistant. Federal civilian agencies aren't allowed to procure any commercial system unless it actually meets the quantum resistant standards that NIST is developing. And sort of to add a little bit of oomph to actually the transition, to say that this isn't just going to be some mandate that's always 20 years in the future. Within 90 days of the release of this first set of standards, there will be some sort of actual timeline for deprecation. And so this really is something that we have to move towards. And then, most pertinent to my job, within 1 year of the signing of NSM 10, which I guess means 2 weeks ago, the NSA will provide guidance to our customers, the national security systems, on how to transition to quantum-resistant cryptography to mitigate this threat. And with that sort of final bullet point, 3.c.x, in mind, last September, 8 months ahead of schedule, we released the Commercial National Security Algorithm 2.0 suite, and we've been providing guidance since then. So let's look at exactly what that is. So the Commercial National Security Algorithm Suite, CNSA 2.0, this is the set of commercial standards which are allowed to be used to protect national security systems. Things that are classified is probably what most people think of. This is if you use these algorithms in the appropriate way as specified through, say, the CSFC program, this is good enough to protect top secret data. And so we have over here, let's see, does the pointer work? Oh, yeah. We have the original CNSA suite, which dates back to when we were beginning to inform our customer base of the need to transition to post-quantum, which is about 8 years ago. And this is what people are deploying in the field today. If you log into NIPRNet or what have you, you're probably using this. And then over here we have the update as of last September. So just to go through this somewhat quickly, and then in more detail as the talk goes on. We said back in 2015 that AS256 is good enough to protect your data from quantum attack, and 8 years later, I can assure you, we still have the utmost confidence in AS256, possibly the most studied algorithm in existence. For the purposes of a cryptographic hash, of providing authentication, providing integrity, generating pseudo-random numbers, a whole host of other cryptographic properties, we went with SHA-384 back in 2015, and just like AS256, SHA-384, this is among the single most computed functions in the universe. SHA-2 has been actually calculated more times by several orders of magnitude than anything else in the world. And we still have confidence in SHA-384. That said, we also add SHA-512 and said you're not allowed to use that, and that really was based very much on market conditions. Most commercial products have adopted that, and and since that is now readily available in a way that maybe was less clear it would be in 2015, customers are certainly allowed to use that. But moving on to sort of the real new things, CNSA 1.0, we had advised our customer base back in 2015 that people needed to be prepared for a fast transition to quantum resistance when it came, and with that in mind, we left open flexibility to use either RSA-3K or P384 elliptic curve arithmetic at the time, whichever suited folks best, so that they could prepare, spend the time instead of focusing on transitioning from one or the other, focus on how would we transition to quantum resistance when the time came. And last July, NIST announced their selections for standardization from the result of their standardization process that you'll hear about next talk. And they made 4 selections of quantum resistant systems with a wide variety of sizes and parameters. And from those, we selected the highest security level of Kyber for our key agreement, and the closely related dilithium, its highest security level for its digital signature. And once those standards are finalized and published, I'll be able to stick in the relevant FIPS numbers here. Now, a very big change from CNSA 1.0 to 2.0 is originally we just, for ease of use, for a variety of reasons, we want as few security primitives as possible in CNSA, and so we just had this general digital signature thing. Now, when we actually looked at our customer base and you look at what people use different features for where, the actual systems designed to do software signature and firmware signature, these really are very different than where digital signatures are used elsewhere. This is very different than if I'm setting up a secure connection with someone. This is more on the supply chain side of things. And if we look back at NSM-10, there really was this big impetus to, move over fast and get off of quantum vulnerable systems. And with that in mind, NIST had already a written standard for a quantum resistant signature that's only usable in a very niche use case, 800-208, and we said, look, this exists. This should be adopted today. This should be adopted as fast as possible. And, I'm really happy to say that today, if you want, you can get your LMS 256-192 CAVP validated, and you have been able to for many months now. Okay, now, something that folks ask me frequently, when I'm giving this, someone will say, oh, AS256, you guys said that was good in 2015. Do we need a bigger block cipher? Oh, did you increase from SHA-384 to 512 because you need something bigger? Are you worried about quantum computers attacking symmetric crypto? Maybe there's things you don't understand. And that's a very fair question. There's a whole lot I don't understand. But at this point, since they made the mistake of asking the mathematician to speak first, I think I'm going to pull in just a little bit of information science. There's this really nice result in quantum information science. There's a reason people were studying all this quantum computing. It's a really fascinating subject that is a lot different than much of the rest of complexity theory. And usually there's two things a quantum computer can do that I wouldn't say are household terms. Well, that anyone who has heard of quantum computing maybe has heard of these as well. There's Shor's algorithm, and there's also Grover's algorithm, discovered very shortly thereafter. Grover's algorithm was discovered in 1996, and it's this very early example in the history of the subject of a quantum speedup. It has really immensely broad applicability. All sorts of problems in computer science can be sped up by Grover's algorithm. It provides what's called a quadratic speed up. And if you want to think what that is, usually what someone will say is, oh, well, imagine you had to try a million times before you found the right answer to something. Well, if you have Grover's algorithm, you don't have to try a million times, you only have to try 1,000 times. It's really neat that this works. And people bring up Grover because they say, oh, this quantum computer, maybe it can solve this broad, hard problem. Grover, I should say, within the literature, it's cited all the time. Its generalizations, probably at least half the papers when people say, use a quantum computer to solve problem X, what they really mean is, I finally understood Grover's algorithm, I understood problem X, and I figured out how it applies. The thing is, if you're studying complexity theory, it's great that it's a speed up, but it's actually more interesting. It's maybe unique in the science of complexity theory. It followed by later results by Vazirani and Zalka. It's not just a proof that something's possible, and that something really unequivocally that cannot be done on a classical computer is possible on a quantum computer, because it's definitely that. But at the same time, it's a promise you can't do any better than Grover. The theorems came at pretty much the same time. It's both an upper bound and a lower bound, and they kept strengthening the way in which it was a lower bound. You really, really, really can't do better than Grover. And in a certain technical sense, if you assume that the system you started off with is secure, in, like I said, a pretty technical sense, then there is no quantum attack on that system that's any better than this quadratic speedup. And once you've gone to AES 256, unless you think AES is broken on a classical computer, you're good to go. So this is great because this simultaneously gives us, the correct post-quantum key size for AES or SHA, but also tells researchers the sorts of problems to use for a basis of post-quantum cryptography. This both can form the basis of those hash-based digital signatures like LMS that NSA does for firmware signing, but also gives you a hint for why in Dustin's standardization effort, why people were focusing on the hard problems they were focusing on. Because the super technical phrase is that relative to an oracle, NP is not contained in BQP. And therefore, certain problems, it'd be immensely surprising were they exponentially faster on a quantum computer, because we know their general form of them is not. Okay, so why did I go with why did NSA go with the selections we made? There's a whole bunch of reasons, and the number one reason when we're picking things is security. Okay, in CNSA 2.0, NSA's data national security data must be secured for a very long time horizon against a whole lot of threats, and we probably have a longer time horizon than just about anyone else, and possibly a more robust threat set than just about anyone else. But that said, the security of a primitive doesn't mean the security of a system is not concentrated just to the security of a primitive. The goal is to actually deploy these algorithms and have them out there. And an algorithm that maybe in some technical sense is slightly more secure against a very particular attack vector, if this can't be integrated into a system securely, this isn't a good algorithm. And this is why we are only allowing firmware signing from LMS and not using it out everywhere, for instance. Also, validation, very important. I don't think I need to tell folks here. I mean, this is really the principle behind things like the commercial solutions for classified is that if one wants to comply with NSA guidance, if we set this up well, it should be easy to go to a lab and have the lab certify something. Ease of acquisition, once again, with the CSFC program and such, it should not be difficult to comply with our guidance if you're doing sort of the right security thing to begin with. If you're buying new equipment and phasing out your old things, then we want to make this easy for folks to be post-quantum secure. Last but not least, universality. When somebody spends a whole lot of money buying a medium-sized system, they're not really hoping that just this small group will get to email each other. They're hoping it scales up. They're hoping that their agency will get to talk to other agencies. And this really is why when somebody says, can I use some other signature here, why aren't there more sizes available? It's because historically that means your system is going to get stuck at some point, and it's going to be very expensive to retrofit it to have two systems talk to each other. Okay, we were told to provide timelines for transition, so you'll probably see this slide several more times, especially if you're here tomorrow on CSFC Day. What? Good slide. Yeah, I like it. I'm glad we have a graphics department, because I can assure you it gets more impact here than my bulleted list does. So as I said before, NIST standardized LMS and XMSS today. We can start adding that as an option for software signing today. There's CAVP testing available for LMS today. And with that in mind, we are hoping to see it added today, and in 2025 we're expecting that to be the default. And we understand there are places that can't upgrade that fast. We'll see how that all shakes out, but by 2030 it will be required and default in 2025. Outside of software signing, we understand that different types of equipment, different hardware, different software upgrade can be upgraded at different rates. It'd be crazy to think that we had one timeline for everything. Now, our goal is, right here is where 2035 is when we were told to have this all done, but we really think we can actually hit a few years earlier, 2033. But, some things are going to move faster than others. If you look today, there are web browsers today that default to Dustin's post-quantum algorithms where available. Those are the industries have been doing integration testing today. It will not be surprising if when the final standards come out, they are able to get validation tested quickly, and if that is the case, we are expecting those to default to post-quantum within a year or so of the standardization process. But things that are like actual hardware upgrades, it's understandable that's going to take more time before you can expect hardware to actually be replaced, and things with lots of library dependencies, you expect that they'll replace more and more of their stack with post-quantum as time goes on, but it might take a number of years before fully every dependency is out of, say, an operating system. But with that in mind, I still will point out, I think that a significant amount of the quantum threat should be mitigated by 2030, and we do hope, once again, to get to that 2035 date with a few years to spare. With that, I think I am happy to open the floor to questions.
Look, I have one question. Often we get the question, the selection for LMS of SHA 256 and 192. And a lot of people question why 192 instead of 256. Or why that was.
Can you repeat that to just?
Yeah, so there's a question going to here, why we recommended LMS 256-192 instead of LMS 256-256. I mean, the answer is these hash trees, well, there's several answers. First off, we took the unusual step here of saying either LMS or XMSS are fine. You know, anything, any of, I believe there's 4 total parameter sets here that we are allowing. And we took that step because software signature really is a closed ecosystem. The developer is making their own signing environment and their own checking environment, and there is not expected to be interoperability among firmware signing, for instance. And so with that in mind, we needed to pick something. SHA-256 was widely deployed. That seemed the natural thing when someone said try it. The 192 reduces the size quite a bit. The 192 does not there are certain theoretical attacks that mean that under certain models there's not really that much difference between the 256 and the 192. For instance, I mean there's a variety of reasons. Another one is if you prototyped it early with 256, 192 and said, is that okay? Then the answer was, yeah, that was okay. And we didn't want that to somehow slow people down from adopting it. The fact that we prototyped it with one thing and now you're recommending another. Yeah.
Given that cryptographically relevant quantum computers don't exist at the moment, and there's some undefined period of time, but it's not going to be next year, where they would exist, how much thought is going into mitigating the risk of transitioning to post-quantum cryptography and finding out that creates a vulnerability in classical digital cryptography? I think it was last year that Cyc was trivially broken by a laptop in 30 minutes. So is there thought about, okay, when we do this transition, is this a flash cut? Are we going to CSFC style dual tunnel, one classic, one post-quantum? You know, how do you address the factor that in concern about a future risk, you create a bigger immediate risk?
Sure. That's a great question. So just to repeat, I like your final summary. How do you make sure that in addressing the future risk, you're not introducing a more recent one with particular highlights on the security of the algorithms? I mean, on the one hand, I would say, going back to my list of five goals with this, you know, security is number one. That is our goal. When you're talking about transitions causing vulnerabilities, I would say that there is, from a historical precedent standpoint, you know, when you transition from TLS 1.1 to 1.2 or 1.2 to 1.3, these are also very major changes and possibly just as major, possibly more major, and do frequently give you a broader attack surface, or you're trying to limit the attack surface. And we study that very closely too. So on the one hand, I would say this is probably what people most worry about. But on the other, and I hope Dustin points to this in his talk, but like I would, and also from the perspective of you know, thinking about TLS 1.1 to 1.2 and 1.2 to 1.3 and IKE v1 to IKE v2 and all of those, that is part of why NSA pushes back on the statement that there would need to be a hybrid agreement within the say your TLS or IKE itself, is switching to that hybrid, we worry would require a lot more thought about how to make it secure, and we certainly think that there are lots of people doing that thought, and we'll hear later today from, I think, Rebecca Guthrie, who is in NSA standards group, and they're working very hard to make sure that the people who choose to do that are doing it securely. But that is a huge risk one adds if one says, I'm going to totally change how I do a key agreement. That's at least as big of a risk as saying I'm going to change what key agreement I'm doing. But in terms of the security of the key agreements itself, I mean, I push back on people saying this is new, it might be vulnerable. Post-quantum crypto, this is really tied to the earliest history of public key. Okay, if I look at the history of public key, long before I ever did any public key, you had the first decade of this was a brand new academic area of study. There's one thing new academics want to do. They want to get their name attached to a problem. And so Diffie and Hellman, they did a great job. They invented this whole field that enabled e-commerce and such. But, from an academic perspective, they said integer discrete log, that's a hard problem. We should think about it. And Ravesh Shamir and Adelman, what they said was, hey, integer factoring's equally cool of a hard problem. We should think about that just as much. You should write papers about our stuff. And Hellman, year after that, he's still at it. He has another grad student. Hey, we should think about combinatorial problems. Combinatorial problems are really hard. These knapsack problems, also lattice problems, these are both the same essential combinatorial problem. Think about encryption with that. McLeese, same time, says that's not a cool problem. Algebraic coding theory, that's a cool problem. That's just discovered 10 years ago. We should think really hard about algebraic coding theory and base encrypt systems off that. Merkle got his dissertation on saying you don't need fancy algebraic coding theory, brand new math. If any problem is hard, I can make a signature. And he said hash-based signatures. You go in that first decade, you still have this history of new problem. You have Koblitz and Miller independently both saying elliptic curves are really cool problems. We should think about those. Matsumoto and Amai saying multivariate quadratics. These are MP complete. Why haven't people thought about these much? That's a decade of 7 different primitives people threw out there. And people aren't just sitting around saying, oh yeah, that's a neat idea, let me not think about it. People thought about this for a long time. And so that's the whole first decade. Now, your second decade, World Wide Web starting up, people are thinking about e-commerce. People are starting to think about standards and what fits into the limitations of the day, the limited bandwidth of the day, the types of computation of the day. And just as RSA is actually going out there for e-commerce, that's when you have Shor come along and he says, here's this interesting new algorithm. This is still 30 years in the past. And this is the second decade. This is early history of public key, not post-quantum, of all public key. Early history, Pierre Shor says, yeah, I've broken a few of these. Less than half, 3 of 7. And then if somebody says, oh, but really, no one's thought about lattices. I mean, I guess they had like 1 year less thought, and but no, there's like academic papers, anything like that. No, this is an immensely well-studied subject that benefits from the 30, 40 years of RSA development. When Dustin selected Kyber Chem, he went with Kyber Chem, K-E-M, not Kyber Encrypt, because he had 25 years of development of RSA, discovering that RSA had a lot of issues if you don't use it as a chem. And he could bake that security in from the beginning and make it much harder to misuse. So in general, I would say, actually more confidence in some ways in these than in many of the older ones.
We've got time for one more question, and we got to stand back.
Is there any, do you give any credence or veracity to the paper, the Chinese paper that came out in December that showed a hybrid method of classical and quantum methods for trying to do factorization, or is that a bunch of smoke?
I was going to say, I don't know what I'm allowed to say or not allowed to say, but I mean, look, you can look at a whole lot of outside papers that went into a whole lot of details about why the classical algorithm that they claim this quantum computer is an exponential speed up on doesn't work. So I would say, whether it's an exponential speedup or not, an exponential speedup of an algorithm that does nothing. As for whether it is an exponential speedup, that then is another tough question to have, but, yeah.
Round of applause for
So that was really great. We got the NSA perspective, and now we get the NIST perspective. So super. Okay, well, fair enough. Okay. Opinions represented do not necessarily, or whatever that the blanket statement is. So now we get to hear from Dr. Moody, a mathematician at the Computer Security Division of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Dr. Moody leads the post-quantum cryptography project at NIST. He received his PhD from the University of Washington in 2009. His area of research deals with elliptic curves and their applications in cryptography. Let's hear it for Dustin Moody.
All right, let's see if maybe they're in here. There we go.
Normally works from a Mac.
That's true.
There we go.
All right, we can see that.
Flexibility.
Okay, yeah, glad to be talking up here, and thanks, Morgan, for introducing the topic, which we're probably fairly familiar with. So I'm from NIST. At NIST, we do a lot of different things. There's a lot of very cool science going on there. I'm in the Computer Security Division, where we focus on standards dealing with cryptography. This table kind of shows several of the cryptographic standards we have. We have public key ones, symmetric key ones. We have various guidance and tools. And the threat, of course, that we know due to Peter Shor's algorithm is that all of the existing public key algorithms that we have standardized and are widely used and deployed around the world would be broken once we have a large enough quantum computer to run Shor's algorithm. So that includes Diffie-Hellman, elliptic curve, RSA, all the digital signature algorithms that we have in FIPS 186. They will all be vulnerable. We can't simply say, well, let's move up to a higher key size. Let's do RSA with 16,000 keys or 16,000 bits. Still will not be secure once you get a big enough quantum computer. On the other hand as well, we also have our symmetric key algorithms. Because of Grover's algorithm, they will also be impacted in terms of their security. And Morgan talked about them as well. They will be impacted, but not as drastically. You may need to go to a larger key, use a longer output on a hash function if you're using a smaller amount. But symmetric key cryptography, well understood the impact of Grover's algorithm. It does not parallelize very well. So the NSA is saying AES 256 is fine for them. We'll put out updated guidance as we get our standards written, but we expect AES 128 for most people will continue to provide plenty of security as well. In talking about post-quantum cryptography, I just want to make clear we're not talking about another kind of field that uses the terms quantum and cryptography. It's also known as QKD. And that's the idea of where you're using these quantum technologies to build crypto systems. And it's very fascinating. It's got great applications. It's known that if you can do this correctly and implement it, you can get unconditional security guaranteed by the laws of physics, which is not something you can do with current classical public key cryptography or the like. So that's why it's got a lot of interest. People have been studying it for a while. However, there are some limitations. It's very expensive. It uses special purpose hardware. It's known how to do key establishment, like QKD, quantum key distribution, but not how to solve the authentication problem. Furthermore, there's geographic limitations. You can't implement it kind of over thousands and thousands of miles unless you have repeaters. And so there are some challenges, which is why we don't expect this to be the solution that's going to be deployed universally. You're not going to be having it on all your phones and everything like that. There is a lot of money going into this. China's investing heavily. They've launched a satellite that does QKD. Many European countries as well are preparing plans to launch satellites as well that will also do QKD. So for some applications, this will work. This is not what NIST has been focusing on as the what most people will need for their cryptographic solutions. Okay, so how soon do we need to worry? This is a chart that comes from Dr. Michele Mosca and his colleagues. Every year they do a survey that they send out to a lot of experts in the field, and they ask them, when are we going to have a big enough quantum computer that will actually threaten current levels of public key crypto? I think the way they phrased it is, what's the likelihood of a quantum computer able to break RSA 2048 in 24 hours? Now, it's a survey, so nobody knows an exact answer, and he's surveying experts in the field, and they may have biases one way or the other. But it gives you kind of at least an idea of what experts are thinking about, what's possible. And this chart is kind of just the main summary. Of course, the report has a lot of more nuance and more details. But if you look at the bottom row there, what's the likelihood in 5 years? Most of these experts thought not that likely. There's just a small percentage chance. If we go up to 10 years on the next row, we see the likelihood starts increasing. By the time we get to 15 years, looks like at least half the experts think that there's a greater than a 50% chance that a quantum computer big enough would be around. Again, we don't know. Maybe it won't be, maybe it will be. But this showed you that people who have a pretty good idea think that there's a significant chance. And since we have to manage that risk, that lets us know, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, that's a reasonable kind of time frame where such a quantum computer could be built. Dr. Mosca also has a well-known theorem that gets talked about a lot. It kind of first captured the idea of what's typically today called harvest now, decrypt later, or store now, decrypt later. And that's the idea of, even though the quantum computer might not come out for 15, 20 years, we can't just wait 20 years and say, we'll deal with it then. You can actually be at risk today, be under attack today, even though the quantum computer isn't here yet. And that's because your adversary could simply copy your encrypted data. They get a hold of it somewhere, and you think, well, that's okay, I've got it encrypted. They can't read it. And that's true. But if a quantum computer comes out in 15 years, and you need your data to be protected for 30 years, you're already at risk then. They're going to be able to get access to your information well before you want them to. So this idea just helps you know that in considering your risk, while we first think about the time until the quantum computer, you need to factor in how long your information needs to be secure, as well as the time it's going to take to create new standards and transition and adopt the new algorithms put into these products. So if for your organization, you can kind of guess what these numbers might be, and that helps you have an idea of how much risk you might be at today. Morgan talked a little bit about some of the guidance we started to see from the federal government. He talked about National Security Memo 10. They had another National Security Memo. Congress passed something, I forget the exact name. It's like the Quantum Cybersecurity Preparedness Act, something like that, that pointed to mostly what these earlier memos and guidance have been saying. But the upshot is they're alerting federal agencies to know that the quantum threat is something we need to take seriously. We need to start preparing steps to transition to it. The most detailed information comes from a memo that the OMB put out last, I think it was November. And this shows some of the kind of the key things that they were wanting agencies to do. So they wanted them to prioritize an inventory of their cryptographic systems, look for where you're using cryptography, what types of cryptography, most importantly, where are you using public key cryptography. Focus on your high value assets, your critical systems. Those are going to be the things that we want to transition first. And it's setting up a way to start reporting this back so that the government can get a good idea of what they're seeing across different agencies. This is still very much ongoing. So it says, tools will be released, procedures for the inventory. Those aren't completely all out there, but they're starting to be developed where people can have these inventories. My colleague Bill will talk about a project that we have where some of these tools are being tested and developed. They're also asked to look at how much funding is going to be needed for the migration and report that back. And make sure that you have a lead for this project. Make sure someone's in charge and is focused on making sure that you'll be ready for the transition. The goal of all this is the federal government hopes to transition as much as possible their most critical systems by 2035, as Morgan said. It's a very ambitious date. I don't think that we will fully transition every system everywhere by 2035. That just is not very realistic, but it's good to set an ambitious goal and work very hard to get there. So what has NIST done to help prepare for the quantum threat and the solutions that we'll have? NIST has had a project in post-quantum cryptography that goes back over a decade. It wasn't until around 2016 that we started taking more concrete steps to get standardization going on. We'd been assembling a team of experts, we'd been holding workshops, we'd been going to the main conferences in the field, publishing papers, that kind of thing. But it was in 2016 that we first announced that we would be doing a public competition-like process to select new algorithms. And NIST has done this kind of thing in the past to develop new cryptographic standards. We used a competition that resulted in the selection of AES. AES is widely viewed as super successful, as Morgan talked about. We also more recently did this with the SHA-3 hash competition to select a new hash function. At the time, it was looking like SHA-2 might have some cracks that might be exploited in the coming years, and so we led a process to get SHA-3. SHA-2 continues to look pretty resilient. But with the post-quantum one, we knew that this competition would be a lot more challenging than the ones in the past. Those were focused on a single primitive, which had been fairly well studied and understood. With post-quantum, we were going to be looking for digital signatures as well as key establishment, because we needed to replace all of our public key standards. So we were looking for different functionalities. We were also aware that this is very much still an ongoing and active research field, so that there would be results coming out during the process that could change things as we went. It's pretty sophisticated levels of mathematics in the design of a lot of these crypto systems. So that would be a challenge. There's issues that we knew, like there's some of the algorithms that were being proposed, they have decryption failures. Even if you implement the algorithm completely correctly, there's a chance that when you decrypt, it doesn't work. It produces a garble, and you don't know. So we knew that issues like that we hadn't had to deal with would just add to the complexity here. Our goal was to basically just make sure that we managed an open and a transparent process with a good timeline attached to it so that we could get cryptographic standards out and everyone would know when that was coming. We knew there wouldn't be a single winner. We knew that there wasn't just a silver bullet that we could say, okay, replace RSA with this one thing and you're going to be completely good. The algorithms that were being looked at in the literature, they had key sizes that were larger, or if they had small key sizes, they were a lot slower than the algorithms we use today. So we knew that we would probably need to have a small number for performance reasons for different applications, but also to have a diversity of security assumptions. We didn't want to say, okay, we like lattices, let's only go with lattices, because if someone comes up with an attack, then we're stuck. So we wanted to look at lattices and codes and multivariate so that we could have different eggs to put. So these are the selection criteria that way back at the beginning that we announced as to how we would evaluate the algorithms. First and foremost is security. The algorithms would be looked at both in terms of classical security and quantum security. For a lot of the algorithms, classical security turned out to be their downfall. They were broken classically, not even dealing with a quantum computer. Quantum security was also a newer topic, and there wasn't and probably still isn't, kind of a universal consensus is the best way to measure security against a quantum computer. We don't have quantum computers. We don't know how fast they'll run, how expensive they'll be. So there's a lot of information where you have to kind of extrapolate. We ended up defining 5 security categories as a way to kind of measure the resources needed to attack certain crypto systems, so that when submitters were designing it, they could propose concrete parameters and say, this provides the same amount of security as AES 128. And AES 128, that's something that we have standardized. We have a good idea of the resources needed to break it. So that was kind of the intuition behind defining these 5 categories of security. And then when the submissions were sent in, they could say, okay, I've got parameters for categories 1, 3, and 5, and then we could compare them against each other. So we would also look at performance as the second criteria. This includes how efficient the algorithm is, as well as kind of the memory, the bandwidth. When you're running a crypto system, often the key size is just as important as how fast it is. So there would be a lot of benchmarking, a lot of real-world experimentation that would need to be done to see how these things would perform. Those were the 2 main criteria, and then we knew there was a lot of other things that it would be great to have, and we listed several of these, and we said, tell us how your scheme does with regards to side channel security. Tell us how simple it is. Is it provide perfect forward secrecy? Are there any advanced functionalities that it could potentially provide? And so designers were encouraged to think about things like that as well. So that process kicked off officially back in 2017, and we've now, 6 years later, we went through 3 rounds of evaluation and analysis. In the very first round, there were 82 schemes that were sent in to us. 69 of them met all our requirements that we'd published, and so they entered the first round where people could begin trying to attack them, analyze them, implement them, do everything, kick the tires on them. Might be a little hard to see. These tables show the different types of systems that were submitted. The primary 2 that were sent in were lattice-based cryptography and code-based cryptography. Probably around 2/3 or 3/4 of all the submissions were based on either lattices or codes. In that first round, there was a lot of attacking going on once we put these online. Very quickly, within the first few months, probably about 15 to 20 of them had been attacked or broken. Cryptographers love having new crypto systems to try and go after. We held a workshop. People started publishing papers, started implementing them. And after a year, we selected the most promising algorithms to move on into the second round. The idea was to keep the same mathematical diversity, just pick the most promising ones, and then just kind of keep evaluating and analyzing. So that second round lasted about a year and a half. We again held a workshop, lots of research, and then we moved into the third round where we picked 7 finalists and 8 alternates as kind of the ones we wanted people to focus on. That third round lasted 2 years, and the outcome was we finally selected some algorithms in July of last year that we would begin the standardization, making standards for. So if we had 2 categories, we were looking for both chems and digital signatures. In the chem category, equivalently public key encryption, Crystal's Kyber was the algorithm we selected. It's based on lattices. It's got very good performance. They introduced algebraic structure into the lattices, so it performs very well. The security has been studied for a number of years, especially with the process. They got a lot more attention on lattices. For digital signatures, we selected 3 algorithms, Crystal's Dilithium, Falcon, and Sphinx Plus. Both Dilithium and Falcon are based on lattices, both good all-around performing algorithms. We expect Dilithium to probably be kind of the primary digital signature algorithm that people use. We also selected Falcon, though, because it has much smaller signatures than Dilithium. Some applications are going to need those small signatures, so Falcon will be available for them. Well, why didn't we just pick Falcon then as the main algorithm? Turns out it has a really complicated implementation. It uses floating point arithmetic, and it can be tricky to get to do it right. There's kind of a lot of pitfalls. So if you're going to use Falcon, you have to make sure and kind of be aware of that and implement it correctly. But Dilithium will fit for most applications and it is a lot simpler. Sphinx Plus was selected. It is based on a different security assumption, the security of stateless hash-based cryptography. its security is viewed as very conservative by cryptographers everywhere. The trade-off for that is it's a lot bigger and slower compared to the lattice schemes. So if you really need security and you're paranoid, Sphinx Plus might be a good option because it's viewed as very, very secure. But we expect that, again, dilithium will be the main algorithm that you use. We wrote a lengthy report, NIST 8413. If you want to read all the kind of the rationale for the selection process, why we picked what we did and didn't pick the other algorithms, you can look there. Now, those were the kind of the main announcement that we did, but we also announced that there were 4 algorithms moving on into a 4th round of a evaluation. So we picked 3 digital signatures, but only 1 chem. Well, we have 4 chems in the 4th round. We expect that we'll pick another 1 or 2 of them for standardization. 3 of them are based on codes. We've got Classic McLeese, Bike, and HQC. We may or may not choose Classic McLeese, and then Bike and HQC are kind of competing against themselves. They have a smaller key size than Classic McLeese, so they're a little bit more performant. The 4th one is Psych. As somebody mentioned, Psych was broken in a really nice research paper last year, so nobody used Psych. It's not going to be selected or standardized. And then the other thing we announced is that we would still continue to look for digital signatures in the future, and I'll explain why in a second. This slide shows our timeline, where we've been and kind of where we're going in the future. Right now, we're working on the draft standards for the algorithms that we selected. We're hoping to put those draft standards out this summer for public comment. There will probably be 90 days where people can evaluate, send us feedback. We'll take that, make any changes, and then we're expecting in 2024 to publish the PQC standards from the algorithms selected. We've been trying to, like on the PQC forum and in other venues, let people know any changes we're making from the 3rd round specifications so that there's no surprises here. We don't expect any big changes from the public feedback. Yeah, so that's kind of our timeline, standards in 2024. The 4th round is ongoing. It'll last probably 2 years, at the end of which we might select 1 or 2 more code-based algorithms to complement Kyber. Kyber, again, is the one we expect to be used. And the additional signature process that we call the on-ramp will also continue in the future. So the reason that we're looking for more digital signatures, and we called for kind of a new, smaller process, is we have some very good lattice signatures, and we have Sphinx Plus. We wanted something that was not based on lattices, but that was faster than Sphinx Plus. If something comes along and we need to not use lattices, a lot of applications would have a hard time with Sphinx Plus. So the point of this call for additional signatures was to look for something not based on lattices, but it was still a good general purpose, all around performing digital signature algorithm. This process will take a number of years. Any standards coming out of it will be 5, 6, 7, 8 years into the future. So that'll be out there. We don't expect that they are going to overtake the algorithms we selected, like dilithium, but we wanted to keep the research going in this field. We don't have a similar process planned for chems. We feel with the lattice-based chems and code-based chems, we have 2 different types of good general purpose algorithms, so we have that need covered. Let's see, it is not advancing, maybe. Okay, it's advancing on here, but not on there, and I'm not sure why.
Not a Mac.
Not a Mac. Exactly why.
Good digital signature.
Okay, still not. Maybe I'll close it and reopen it. Okay, and we'll just start all over. Oh, wait. Okay, right here. So yeah, so standardization, as I said, we're currently writing the draft standards. It involves making lots of decisions when you get down into the weeds and the details. Even though we had the 3rd round spec, If you are on the PQC forum, you see there's lots of discussion about small details, exactly how should we specify certain things. So that's ongoing. We are currently writing Kyber, dilithium, and Sphinx Plus. Falcon will be delayed slightly as we focus on these first three, and then once we get them out, we'll quickly transition over to writing the Falcon one, but it will be delayed. We're going to give them kind of new names. The government always, is full of abbreviations, so we'll have new kind of standardized names for them. Despite what's written up here, it says MLWE Chem. I think we're going to shorten it to ML Chem, ML Sig, or not even Sig. It's going to be, I should fix this, MLDSA. Anyway, there'll be these names. People will still continue to call them, I'm sure, Kyber and dilithium and so on, but, we got to do what we got to do. Parameter sets, we will have parameter sets that were included in the third round spec. Mostly these are categories 1, 3, and 5, so you'll be able to select a range of different options there. If you need more details, I'm happy to kind of talk to you about which hash functions will be used and things like that. A lot of the focus is, of course, on the transition and the migration. Morgan talked a little bit about hybrid solutions. NIST will provide more guidance on transition, but our focus is first on creating the standards, because we can't say transition to this until the standard is written. I do want to point out in regards to hybrid, NIST does have it already specified as to how you can use a hybrid solution and still get FIPS validated. This is in SPA 156C for key establishment. The basic idea is you take a shared secret you get from a NIST approved algorithm, you concatenate it with something else, maybe you're using Kyber, maybe you're using QKD or whatever, run it through a KDF, and FIPS can still validate that. It's validating the NIST approved algorithm, not the other part, but it's a way that you can kind of build in hybrid if you're wanting to. NIST is part of the conversation on should you or should you not use hybrid. We're not going to be mandating it or say that you have to. It's going to depend a lot on what application, what protocol, but we're talking and sharing the information, make sure people know the advantages, needing the risks as well. We have a project on migration to PQC. My colleague Bill Newhouse will give a talk later today, so I'm not going to say much about this, but this is to help organizations get more guidance and develop some of the tools that will be needed to help with the transition. There are other standards organizations working on this. NIST led the way, and a lot of these other organizations kind of collaborated and partnered with us and are now taking the algorithms that we selected and doing standardization on their own as well. Different countries as well are doing kind of a similar thing. We've seen guidance from Germany and France about which algorithms they're going to use and things like that. I think my time is short, so I will just wrap up here. Even though we don't yet have the standards yet, there are still things that you can do today to prepare. This kind of shows a bunch of them. I'm not going to read through them all. We don't recommend you get ahead of the standards. Don't start putting things into product and marketing it. Wait for the standards to come out. You can certainly test them, become familiar with them, see how they will work for you, things like that. But you definitely want to start preparing now. So just in conclusion, we're grateful for everybody's cooperation, all the hard work that's gone into this. We're glad we can see some of the light at the end of the tunnel. There's a lot of work still ahead to do, but we've also come a long way, and it's nice that we have some algorithms that will be standardized in the not too distant future. So thank you much for the chance. And
Couple of questions. When you guys are looking at these algorithms, do you look at what the needs for entropy would be in any of them? Does that come into play at all? Or?
Yeah, that was definitely a part of Oh, sorry. Yeah, he's asking about when the algorithms that were submitted were being analyzed. Did we look at what entropy was needed, how much was needed, the randomness? Yeah, definitely that was a part. Different algorithms need randomness, and then they use it in different ways. So yeah, that was.
And is that expressed in the standard at all?
Yep. It'll say, you need this much bits of entropy, use this NIST approved algorithm, things like that. Yeah. Yep.
Other question? So your threat slide and your timeline,
Do you think that's looked at with really rose-colored glasses? Because if somebody actually can do it now, or is closer to you, think they're actually going to say anything?
No, yeah, it's certainly already happening. I mean, I've heard that from people that are involved in intelligence, that our adversaries certainly have been aware of this threat for a long time. Even just with classical cryptography, they'll copy the data and wait till they can break it. So certainly that's been happening. That threat is mostly just to help people understand the need to why we need action, and not just wait. But yep.
Anything else?
I think there's one right behind you.
Oh, sorry. Being from Canada at CSC, 2 questions about the sort of participation options with NIST and the standards development. The standardization conferences that are there, are international participants able to go to that?
Oh yes, certainly. This was a very international effort. Submitters were from around the world. It's very international. You go to one of our conferences, see people from everywhere. Yeah.
Okay. The second piece then sort of relates to that, the testing and analysis portion. Are you open to integrees or external assistance, or is that a national, like US only focus during the testing phase?
Well, the CMVP is developing the validation programs, and their goal is to have things done as quickly as possible. They're hoping that when the standards are published, they'll have validation and testing ready to go at the same time. So I think they're working on it on their own. I think they are talking to some of their counterparts in Canada in particular, but yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? Cool.
So we are officially at a break. Schedule says we're supposed to be back at 10:45. I think someone else will take over moderator duties, but thank you all very much. It's been a super interesting morning so far, and looking forward to more. Enjoy the break, and we'll see whose coffee we're supposed to be drinking in the hallway. If they have better coffee or food, just go next door.